Some of the most moving tributes to the victims of September 11th were actually published by the New York Times in a series that was called Portraits of Grief. It ran every day for 3 months and became, as one Times reporter wrote, a sort of a national shrine. The profiles are now collected in a book. They appear periodically now in the Times, though not every day. They've captured the lives of ordinary people in the smallest of details. Anybody who's read the newspaper in the last year has been immensely moved by it. They changed also the lives of some of those who wrote them. Here again is ABC's Bob Brown.
The book to which Tina Kelly contributed is too big to bring home, she says.
I don't bring it home. I leave it at work. It's too big for my apartment and it's too sad.
Ms. Kelly lives in a Brooklyn apartment with her husband and 19-month-old daughter, where the space on the lower shelves in her living room is taken up with children's books and make-believe. The monumental book she helped shape is this one, 555 pages, anecdotal snapshots of more than 2,000 lives, called Portraits, 9/11/01, first published in the pages of the New York Times. In the long, somber history of memorializing the victims of wars and disasters, these portraits broadened how the scope of tragedy is measured.
Because it's civilians, it's people who were caught entirely unaware, people who may not have been there under slightly different circumstances if their train had been late that day or if the Giants had lost the night before. They're people who had no expectations that their lives would be over soon.
Think of how we first learned of the victims of September 11th, through posters and flyers and appeals from families hoping to find their loved ones.
Anybody see out there? Anybody see out there? She has long braids.
Because so many of the deaths remained unconfirmed as the process of identification extended for months, the New York Times began compiling its accounts of the victims not as full biographical obituaries, but as small portraits created through telling details.
Greg Ernst remembers Sunday, September 9th, when he and his girlfriend, Alicia Titus, had been together for 9 months. It was the first time we told each other we loved each other, he said.
Of the 90 portraits Tina Kelly wrote, one of her favorites was of flight attendant Alicia Titus, for the kind of detail that speaks volumes in a few words.
Mr. Ernst knew that her happiness ran deep. She laughed in her sleep. That was something I really liked, he said, though they never figured out what she was laughing about.
You were distinguished by the kind of life that you led and the dreams that you had. And as I did them all, it was an old feeling that I'd had in all the years I was in journalism, that everybody has a dream and everyone has a nobility that if we as reporters take the time to find, we will find it.
Anthony DePalma came from the paper's business section to contribute to the portraits. He reached a turning point in his understanding of them, he says, when he was assigned the name Lucy Crefassi.
It turned out that Lucy was just one of these New Yorkers who didn't belong to an association, didn't have a hobby, was not athletic, had never married. She didn't have her own house. She lived with her mother and her brother. And I thought to myself, how am I going to do this?
The telling detail on Lucy Crefassi, whose portrait was published on December 9th of 2001, turned out to be a simple one. It makes you wish you could have known her.
Everybody loved Lucy, and why not? Lucy Crefassi was the kind of woman who always seemed to have a big smile and time to solve everybody else's problems. Lucy Crefassi was known for her devotion to the singer Julio Iglesias and for her classy sense of fashion. Lucy only had 2 vices, said her brother Frank: shoes and pocketbooks.
Whether they worked from their desks or their homes, the reporters made a substantial number of contacts by phone rather than with personal visits. And even so, they were often stunned by the grief they found. Anthony DePalma remembers learning of a brother and sister named Christine and Michael Egan, who were visiting in Mr. Egan's World Trade Center office on September 11th. DePalma heard the story over the phone from Mr. Egan's wife and ended his portrait with it.
Mrs. Egan said her husband always called her no matter where he was. He called that morning too. "You made it," she said. "No, we're stuck," said Mr. Egan. Then, still on the phone, she watched his building collapse on television. He had to call, she said, but all he could say is, "I love you, darling." When she told me that, everything stopped. At that moment, if we were sitting there together, she would have seen a professional journalist of over 20 years' experience absolutely speechless. And we both sat on the telephone for maybe 4 minutes, 5 minutes, not saying anything. She holding back the tears, me trying to figure out, what do I do next?
Do you think you could reach a point where you would have to say, I have to stop for a while, or I can't do these?
Mm-hmm. I've done that. I've had a couple of chances to sort of take a break from it and do other stories that I could do during my shift. And I needed to, because I want to stay fresh so that I can do them justice.
You can read in the Iliad small portraits of soldiers who died in a common war. You can see in Normandy the rows of white crosses symbolizing a common cause and a magnificent sacrifice. And in Oklahoma City, the extraordinary memorial to the victims of the Murrah bombing, with its gates of time and field of empty chairs. These September 11th portraits, because of the staggering range of victims in nationality and social standing and interests, have, out of necessity, captured the most profound denominator of all, a common membership in the human race. You have a young daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Will there be a time when you'll want to sit down and talk with her about having done this and what it meant to you?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think it's a way, when I have that conversation with her, I'll want her to know that everyone is special. Even people that you pass on the subway that you wouldn't think would be interesting to talk to, or that you think has a job that might not be that interesting on paper, that all the people I've spoken to have just made me sort of sit up and say, wow, that's interesting.
Because these were not people who belonged, they didn't wear a uniform. They didn't belong to a regiment. There's no way to bring them all together. They didn't have any connection other than that day, that building, and now this book. And so for them, it becomes a means of connecting something that was recognized as having value and uniqueness by an institution and by a society.
A lot of reporters cried this year. We'll continue in just a moment.
From ABC News, this is 9/11. Now reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
We're going to go to the New York Stock Exchange in just a moment, and we're very conscious of the fact that this is not an occasion or an experience that can be dealt with in any complete way by reciting numbers, but we're haunted by the numbers in many respects. The New York Stock Exchange was closed for much of a week. When it finally reopened, the Dow went down 684 points, and it was the beginning of an extremely difficult year. A year had already been difficult in the economy, but made more difficult by the uncertainty and the chaos that 9/11 caused. There were, on this day a year ago, real concerns that the economy of the United States, perhaps even the global economy, had taken such a devastating blow, and it took an assistant or a deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve to keep it going by flooding the nation with currency, moving money around the country in the Fed's special airplanes so that people wouldn't go to their cash points and find that there was no money there and there'd be a run on banks and stuff. It is just so extraordinarily complex. We've all said it a million times, so it's not novel whether or not the people who attacked the country a year ago this morning had any knowledge whatsoever, could not have had in their wildest imaginations of a sense of the complexity of all the things that happened subsequently to the country and to the world. We want to talk in this next half hour about the collapse of the Twin Towers and the sacrifices that so many firemen made that day. We talked a little bit to John Miller earlier about it, but the collapse of the buildings was something so inconceivable that it took us and others a while before we actually fully realized what was happening. We've been, I hope you agree, judicious about showing coverage from that day, all throughout the last year, our bosses decided, we all think quite wisely, to show the actual collapse of the buildings only when it was absolutely necessary. And this perhaps is one of those occasions when we will show it, just so you're mindful of that, as a way of remembering for all of us how it was on this day a year ago as tragedy unfolded for all of us. All aircraft currently in the air over the United States have been ordered to land at the nearest airport.
I think
One
what
of
you're
you,
going
hang
to
on
see
a
is
sec, John. I just want to check one thing, because, John, we now have what do we have? We don't.
it looks like a new plume, a new large plume of smoke.
Peter, it's Don Daly down here. I'm 4 blocks north of the World Trade Center. The second building that was hit by the plane has just completely collapsed. The entire building has just collapsed. It folded down on itself, and it is not there anymore.
The whole side has
The
collapsed?
whole building has collapsed.
The whole building has collapsed?
The building has collapsed.
We're talking about massive casualties here at the moment, and we have,
Stand by. They seem to have the problem at the North Tower.
Oh my God. Both trade towers, where thousands of people work on this day, Tuesday, have now been attacked and destroyed. There is simply no way to accurately describe the emotion this evokes in people all over the world, friends of the United States and enemies of the United States as well. Just one personal observation about to what degree we were caught off guard. I didn't see those pictures for, 2 or 3 months after the event. And when I saw them for the first time in conjunction with another journalist, we couldn't believe that I hadn't recognized that the buildings were coming down. And that is, for us, some of us here, I think, more than anything else, a sign of how the extraordinarily was the unanticipatable at all times. Now, of course, we're simply familiar. We think we all saw it and all shared it all the time. At the time, it was absolutely not the case. The Brotherhood of Firefighters was, of course, shattered by the events of that day. Thousands of them, some of them off-duty, some retired, responded to the attacks in Lower Manhattan. More than 300 firefighters went into those buildings and never came out. It was the worst loss of life in the history of firefighting and this country. And it has led subsequently and will ultimately mean some significant changes in the way firemen do their jobs. Here's a report from ABC's John McKenzie.
Tommy Dunn had been a New York City firefighter for less than a year. He was assigned to this firehouse in Brooklyn, 5 miles from the World Trade Center. On the morning of September the 11th, Dunn had just returned from an EMS run.
Say about 8:50, maybe about 8:50, everything started to get a little crazy. And a couple guys in the back in the kitchen yelled up, said, "Tommy, turn on the TV." So I switched it on. It's like, oh, wow, some job. So you start getting real nervous, start getting anxious. You double, triple check your gear, everything on the rig, you're ready to go.
And with many more firefighters than usual.
It was exactly at the change of tours. It was 10 minutes before the change of tours. So we had the on-duty platoon in the firehouse and the oncoming platoon in the firehouse.
Harry Myers is an assistant chief.
A rig that normally would have went out with 5 people on it now had 8 or 10 people on it. So we had a double response.
An unprecedented response from firehouses throughout the city.
Attention, 68 engines, 35 engines, 50 engines. I owe you 7 more engines. We're in the back. I need all units to go to direct. Quiet, let me talk. Center, clear the air. 26 standby, land the field comes. 86 to Manhattan, urgent.
You're basically at the foot of the towers, and you're looking up, and that's when it hits you. That's when you realize the magnitude of the fire, and that it's more like a war zone than a fire.
It is now 9:50. 1 hour since the planes crashed into the Twin Towers. The most senior chiefs in the fire department have set up a command post at the base of the towers, assessing the damage and directing firefighters up into the burning buildings, as everyone else is heading down.
People were pretty orderly, considering what was going on.
Lieutenant Mickey Cross is a 25-year veteran in the department.
They stayed on the outside coming down, and they were encouraging us, they were offering us water, and we were encouraging them to keep, keep moving, you're doing great, you're doing great. And this went on, and we would stop about every 5 floors or so, take a little breather, because the guys were carrying up a lot of equipment.
Cross led his company of 5 men to the 22nd floor of the North Tower. Just as they arrived, the adjacent South Tower began to fall, and Tommy Dunn, the rookie, was walking directly towards it.
And you heard it. You basically heard it, and you looked up, and I could very clearly see that the entire top section of the tower had begun to collapse and was falling on us. Everyone just started hitting and tapping shit. Let's go, let's run, let's get out of here. And everyone separated, scattered, ran. I had maybe 8 to 10 seconds of running time, and then it overtook you. I fell down. I don't remember ever stopping. Everybody was, they were crying. Everybody was already beginning to gag and cough from the debris in the air. I basically just cursed. I don't remember thinking anything. I was just, I know you can't say it on TV, but I was just cursing over and over again, the F word. Just because I didn't know what else to do. You were just so overwhelmed by everything going on around you.
With the South Tower down, firefighters inside the North Tower have been ordered to evacuate. Some later complained that they never got the order, that their radios were not working. Mickey Cross, now on the 23rd floor of the North Tower, began heading down that crowded staircase. He made it as far as the 4th floor.
And then it started. And then I started getting hit with things. It was very loud, there was very loud noises, and I started getting bing bang, and I thought, well, this is it. And I remember thinking, I just hope this is gonna be fast. And then all of a sudden there was silence. There was no more noise, no more wind. It was total silence. It was so quiet. And here I was in this position. Now I was kind of partially buried. And I think like I'm the only person left alive. And then I started hearing noises, movement, guys are moaning. I remember one guy saying, oh, my head hurts, but there were other people alive.
14 people trapped together under a mountain of rubble.
Engine 24 transmitted a mayday in a promenade that have firefighters trapped. We believe there are numerous members trapped in the vicinity of the west side of that building.
The maydays are going out, we're getting responding, so we know people are looking for us. So we started getting a little hopeful.
But above them, the rescue effort was in shambles.
The radios were full of maydays, full of people that were trapped, needed help, didn't know where they were. They couldn't give locations. They're saying, yeah, I'm on the 3rd floor, or I'm in the lobby of the hotel, but where is it? Nobody knew, and the towers were gone.
Gone too were the men who were supposed to coordinate the rescue.
I don't think there was an overall command at that point. Most of the command, the top level chiefs, Chief Gansey, the chief of department, Chief Burns, who's a citywide tour commander, Chief Barber, who's a citywide tour commander, they were all killed in the collapses. It was just a chaotic situation. It was organized chaos, but it was chaos.
Mickey Cross and the others trapped with him did not wait for help. They crawled and climbed up a patchwork of beams, following a sliver of light. It took 3.5 hours, but finally they were free, standing on top of what was a 110-story skyscraper.
I don't remember feeling lucky. I don't remember feeling angry. I just kind of very confused, like sort of like, oh, what do I do now?
Gradually, many firefighters made their way back to their firehouses that evening and began to learn just how much they had lost at Ground Zero. A total of 343 men.
Something wasn't right. There's no way there were this many guys missing. And when you come through and you see, you know, guys that were your best friends, you know, names appearing on that list, it's almost not real. It's almost like a dream. Like, this can't be happening. You know, Jimmy Coyle, Joe Henry, Mike Keefe, these guys are animals, you know, they can't die. Come on, they're above that, you know.
The next day, at firehouses across the city, New Yorkers began creating makeshift shrines to the fallen firefighters. They came with candles and flowers and hugs, lots of hugs. They started books of condolences, the messages inside, the same as those plastered on the walls.
When we really needed them to be there, they just sacrificed their life for us. They walked into the battlefield and they didn't think twice.
Thank you so much.
Since the attack, the New York Fire Department has identified needed changes in equipment and procedures in the event of a similar disaster, using better, more reliable radios to communicate with firefighters, keeping some top-level command staff at headquarters so the entire leadership is not in jeopardy, and restricting the number of off-duty firefighters at the scene. But some things will not change.
The New York City Fire Department will never be in the business of telling people, if you're in a building and you're in trouble, we're not going to come and get you. We will try and evacuate the building as quickly as possible with as few people as possible, but we will do what is necessary to protect the citizens of the city.
A report from John McKenzie on that particular day. John Milley, you mentioned a fact about the department that I've forgotten.
Well, it was that day, 60 of the 343 firefighters weren't even working. They were off duty. It came so close to shift change, they heard it on the radios in their cars or at their homes, and they turned around and they went to the scene on their own time.
Which takes me, thank you very much, to Dennis Smith, the author of Ground Zero, former firefighter himself, still an honorary deputy chief, as I believe. Those men who answer the call volunteered and rushed to the trade towers. If it happened again, would they do that? Would they be allowed to do that? Would they be discouraged from doing that?
Well, there have been a lot of policy changes in the fire department itself. About the men, I think there's this distinction to be made between duty and courage beyond the call of duty.
Right.
You know, duty brought them down there, and it was that beyond the call of duty that brought them up those stairs. The fire department is very concerned about secondary and diversionary tactics by terrorism. And so when they go into alarms like the subway, for instance, when before the first alarm, 5 companies would go down into the subway to search out the emergency. Now they will only send 1 company down and the other 4 will stay up on top to make certain there's not a diversionary tactic going on. High-rise buildings, until we develop a reliable repeater system. You know, there is now certain communication systems that are being in place. The communications between the police and the fire department is being improved. Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Scopetta have committed themselves publicly to making certain that the fire department and police department get together at these emergencies.
You're taking us into a huge debate that there has been in New York City, and I think with other fire departments too, which I guess amounts to second guessing on orders given, on failure for the police department and the fire department to coordinate with one another. What, in broad terms, would be different next time?
Well, I mean,
God forbid there should be a next time.
Yeah, but, well, certainly there's going to be another emergency. Now, whether it's a terrorist-inspired emergency or some natural emergency or whatever, but these things happen in large cities, and we have a history of it in New York. And I think that the next time you will see an effective Office of Emergency Management, I think that the police department and fire department will be involved in that office and not just have it run by a civilian administrator. And I think that the communications between the two companies, the two departments, will be much tighter than it has been.
There was an Office of Emergency Management here in the city, the mayor's, and it was destroyed on September the 11th. So one of the things I assume they will do it elsewhere. I want to talk to you in a moment about whether the culture has changed. I want to talk to you about guilt and about grief in just a second ago. But I think we'd very much like to hear the last names read from Ground Zero. It has been going on all morning, so let us return to the reading of the names to the end of the list.
Christopher W. Wodenschek.
Martin P. Walforth.
Catherine Susan Wolf.
Jennifer Yen Wong.
Sue Chung Wong.
Ying Ping Wong.
Yuk Ping Wong.
Brent James Woodall.
James John Woods.
Patrick J. Woods.
Richard Heron Woodwell.
David Terrence Woolley.
John Bentley Works.
Martin Michael Wortley.
Rodney James Watton.
William Wren.
John Wayne Wright.
Neil Robin Wright.
Sandra Lee Wright.
Jupiter Yam Bem.
Suresh Yanamadala.
Matthew David Yarnell.
Myrna Yaskulka.
Shakila Yasmin.
Olabisi Shady Layeni Yi.
William Yemile.
Edward P. York.
Patrick Kevin York.
They were so much more than just names.
They meant a lot to us. Okay?
Raymond R. York.
Suzanne Yeomans.
Barrington Young.
Jacqueline Young.
Elkin Yun.
Joseph C. Zaccoli.
Adele Agabi Zachary.
Arkady Zaltzman.
Edwin J. Zebrana Jr.
Robert Allen Zampieri.
Mark Zagrilli.
Christopher Rudolph Zarba Jr.
Ira Zaslow.
Kenneth Albert Zellman.
Abraham J. Zelmanowitz.
Martin Morales Zumpo Al Tecato.
Zhe Zheng.
Mark Scott Zeppelin.
Jie Yao Justin Zhao.
Evelyn Zeminski.
Michael Joseph Zinzi.
Charles A. Zion.
Julie Lynn Zipper.
Salvatore Zisa.
Procopius Paul Zois.
Joseph J. Zucala.
Andrew S. Zucker.
Igor Zuckelman.
Lorraine Antigua.
Frank Thomas Aquilino.
Babita Jajamati Guman.
Juan Hodges.
Donna T. Jones.
Donald W. Jones.
Michael F. Lynch.
Vincent S. Morello.
Takashi Ogawa.
May God bless the victims. We love you all. May God bless America.
From the first to the last, the 2,801 people that we know perished in the World Trade Centers a year ago today. It's taken almost 3 hours for a variety of people to read all of their names aloud.
Detail! Present! Halt!
Notes from a nation's heart, one could say. Bugle call born during the Civil War, telling soldiers to put their fires out, now has become something of a national lullaby as it is played over Ground Zero on the first anniversary of September the 11th. And it is not altogether easy to move on, but we're going to try. Dennis Smith, again. I watched the program last night in which you had participated with a great many of the firefighters, and the grieving in the department seems to be so desperately hard. Maybe it's because the firefighters are on more public display. How's the year gone?
I think it's been pretty difficult. The people that I know, which, you know, a couple of hundred anyway, it varies from firehouse to firehouse, and depends on, you know, what that firehouse is doing, how they are occupying their attention, what the families are like in those firehouses, how they're getting along. I think it will take more time for these firefighters to get together. You know, there's over 3,000 have now sought some kind of counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Probably there should be more. They probably need more time alone and away from this.
There's no question I think they need more time alone. In fact, they've said it to us. If you walk around New York City now, you will find that many firehouses have their doors closed, and they've told us. We did a piece on World News Tonight the other week that people have just said, we need time alone. Enough already. We want to be alone. We cannot grieve with people coming and calling us heroes all the time. We're joined by the Chief of Operations by the Fire Department of New York, Salvatore Cassano, who is down at Ground Zero. Chief, I thank you very much. I know what a difficult day this is for you as well. Do you think that the culture of the fire department has been changed by all this?
Well, I think that when you say the culture of the fire department is to help people in need. We do that whether we're on duty or off duty. So we'll never change the culture. It's part of us. It's a family tradition. My brother was a captain in a job. I have nephews in a job. It's just something that perpetuates itself. The culture won't change, but the thinking at operations will.
I've got the sense from some firefighters that there's survivor guilt, that men have suffered deep pain because their comrades died and they lived.
I think that's out there, but part of the job is I gave orders that day to many men that perished, and that was my job. On that day I was doing my job, and those guys that we lost felt like they were doing what they were supposed to be. They were paid to do. They would have been doing that whether they were paid or not. The survivor guilt is out there, but we'll move on from there.
Do you think that many firefighters are having difficulty with this burden of heroism? We have just... Nobody can look at a firefighter, certainly in New York City, without complimenting them in some way.
I think it wears heavy on some, but the heroism is something that is just part of this operation. We'll get on with it. The men have been heroes before September 11th. These were all family men that were coaches. They coached their little league team, their basketball team. They were heroes way before September 11th.
Chief, thank you very much. I know you'd just as soon be with your men, and we're grateful that you gave us the time.
Thank you.
Salvatore Cassano, who is the Chief of Operations for the New York the Fire Department. Could I ask you, Dennis Smith, about that same thing, this burden of heroism? Am I stretching a point?
Well, you know, Joe Higgins, there were 4 Higgins brothers on the fire department, plus his brother Timmy, and he said that, look, all firefighters want is a pat on the back by the guy they're working with, and then they want to go and do their job. You know, I think that we still have another date coming up. You know, on October 12th, we're going to have the final memorial service, and the awarding really of the medals to all of the families. And 150,000 firefighters are expected to come from all over the world to New York that day. And if I could show you this, Peter, the Tiffany and Company designed and manufactured this medal.
Can I have it? It's just easier if I hold it up.
It is. And it was made in sterling silver and covered in solid 22 karat gold. It has 3 firefighters on it going into the rubble, as you see, it represents the over 300 firefighters who were killed. It has the date around it. On the back, it has the Maltese cross, and they'll put their rank and name on it.
Well, I very much appreciate you giving us the time. A very moving program you did last night. Your book is very moving.
Thank you,
your whole
Peter.
experience with this has been very moving for those of us who know you. I want to move on now and talk, if we may, to one of the survivors of this day. Brian Clark was one of the very few in the Twin Towers who managed to escape from the floors above the impact. He worked for Eurobrokers on the 84th floor of the South Tower, and he joins us now. Mr. Clark, thank you.
Pleasure.
I have to ask you first, what does this day mean to you, and does talking about it help?
Yes, it does help. I've also told my story hundreds of times, and that's been a big help through the year. But today is an unprecedented day, just like a year ago was an unprecedented day. We haven't lived through one of these anniversaries before, so it's a day of surely remembrance, tribute, all sorts of things, and yet we're still all burdened with sadness. So it's special in many ways, but it's the same in many ways too.
I know you've told your story before, and I think not everybody has heard it. Would you tell just a bit of it, and if it helps?
Yeah, I can. I in a way feel an obligation to tell the story because people seem to keep wanting information about that day. I arrived at my office normal time, which would be about 7:15 in the morning, did my normal routine. At 8:46, I had my back to the west wall. My office is on the west wall, and I was sitting working at my computer when, boom, my lights flickered. I looked up, and suddenly behind me was just 3 feet from me, but outside the glass, 84 floors in the air, was nothing but swirling flame. I thought an explosion had happened 2 floors up. I jumped up. I'm one of the volunteer fire marshals on our floor, so I grabbed my flashlight and put the whistle around my neck and ran out telling everybody to evacuate. There's been a bomb upstairs. That's what I initially thought. We are a brokerage firm. We occupied the entire 84th floor, and very quickly, within minutes, as the media cottoned on to what was going on, our brokers were telling us, oh, no, it's in Tower 1. There's been apparently a light plane hit, and we lived through all of that as the story developed. Shortening the story somewhat, I happened to be, just fortunate for myself, standing again near the west windows at 9:03 when boom, boom, we were rocked again, our building. In an instant, we knew it was terrorism, and the room fell apart. Dust, cables, speakers, lights all collapsed out of the ceiling. And for the next 10 seconds, I was terrified. That was the only 10 seconds in the day that I was terrified. The building went a long way toward the Hudson River. I really thought we were going over, and I don't exaggerate those things. I flicked on my flashlight, and I led a group of 7 people out to the center core stairways. We went east initially and then turned left to the north and found Stairway A and began a descent. I learned many weeks later that Stairway A was the only way down. And it was just a remarkable day all around.
Mr. Clark, I know you have other obligations this morning, and I'm very grateful for you taking this little bit of time to desk. I have, and also thank you for now, but only for now, because as I can tell other people at home, that you have very graciously given us your time, along with a lot of other people, to recreate the moments of survival and the decisions made in both the towers. And it is part of our primetime broadcasting this evening. And Mr. Clark and others, it's quite stunning. And if it helps, as he says, to tell it again, we'll tell it again. We'll be back in just a moment, but first we have a number of postscripts today on what happened in this case to the firemen's whistles after the Twin Towers collapsed. It will be the first of many of these so-called postscripts that we show you throughout the day. A firefighter's whistle is his personal alarm system. When a firefighter is motionless for more than 30 seconds, the whistle activates, an indication that a firefighter is in distress. The signal is designed to keep going for 3 to 6 hours. After the towers collapsed, whistles could still be heard in the rubble.
When we come back, the President's Day a year ago, his movements, the plan to keep him safe, what we know now that we didn't know then, plus voices from the sky, cockpit recordings, air traffic controllers, what was happening that morning. And in tonight's special coverage, Diane Sawyer with stories from 61 mothers and 63 precious reasons for hope. 9/11 continues.
Could get into the U.S. We did it, but why was it so easy? See The Secret Journey on World News Tonight.
He never saved another's life. He never ruled a nation. He never led men in desperate battle. And yet his whole life is a story of heroism. And his victory will thrill your heart. Christopher Reeve, Courageous Steps, next Wednesday at 10/9 Central on ABC.
From ABC 11 Eyewitness News, this is a 9/11 special report.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Clark. Our local coverage of memorials marking the first anniversary of the September 11th tragedy takes us to the state capitol in Raleigh. We're going to show you a live picture of the ceremony going on right now. You're hearing from the Carolina Harmony Chorus, one of several groups that have been singing and making music this day. Let's hear them for a moment. The Carolina Harmony Chorus performing at the state capitol for the 9/11 memorial. There are a number of speakers who have been speaking already, and the governor is set to speak in just a few minutes. A number of the speakers have been reading the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, as part of this celebration. And we're going to tell you now, though, that there are other events that are going to be coming up, including at 7, a candlelight vigil at NC State, and then another candlelight vigil at UNC at 8 o'clock. And that's our special report for now. Our coverage continues.
ABC News, 9/11 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
We want to talk in this next half hour about how the government responded to the attacks and what it would do differently were something like this to happen again. We're going to begin fairly obviously with what the president was doing on the morning of September 11th a year ago. Mr. Bush, I'm sure you remember, was at the Emma Booker Elementary School in Sarasota, Florida, listening to second graders read. There's a famous picture when the White House Chief of Staff Andy Card whispered into his ear that the country was under attack. This just put the security apparatus into a huge tizzy, and because of those security concerns, there were huge questions about where the president should go and what he should do. Mr. Bush, you recall, spoke very briefly to the nation in Florida, and then he was rushed onto Air Force One and spent almost the entire day being shuttled from one part of the country to another until the security apparatus, the security environment surrounding the president was satisfied that it was okay for him to come back to Washington. Here's how it went.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a difficult moment for America. I unfortunately will be going back to Washington after my remarks.
And we're told that the White House itself, the West Wing at the very least, is being evacuated.
Precautions being taken everywhere. The U.S. Capitol is now being evacuated as a precautionary measure. All federal buildings in Washington have now been evacuated.
The Secret Service have essentially told me, we have an emergency plan in place for exactly this sort of thing, and of course, we're not going to tell you where we take our protectees, including the president.
Where is the president of the United States? The president of the United States led, I know we don't know where he is, but pretty soon the country needs to know where he is. Here's a bulletin about the president's whereabouts. The Bush president is about to make a statement at Barksdale Air Force Base shortly. But the president and his response to this is also part of the psychological package, because the country looks to the president on occasions like this to be reassuring to the nation. Some presidents do it well, and some presidents don't.
We landed here at
Barksdale Air Force Base. This is near Shreveport, Louisiana, at about 11:45 Eastern Time. The president has just made a statement, Peter, a very emotional one, saying that freedom has been attacked, but freedom will be defended. Frankly, Peter, I thought the president not only looked grim, very solemn, but his eyes looked somewhat red. We may be scrambled out of here.
Okay.
Are we leaving? Okay, Peter, we are leaving. And
where are you going, Annie?
Peter, I have no idea.
He's got at least one more stop. Another interesting point along those lines.
Hold on, one more stop?
One more stop between Shreveport and Washington. He's on his way now, we're told, to another undisclosed location.
But Ann Compton, who's been with the president all day, is on the phone from Nebraska. We don't want to lose her if we can have her. Annie, can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, I can.
What are you doing in Nebraska?
President Bush is here at the home of the Strategic Command. This is the area, this is the base where those big doomsday aircraft are kept. And he has disappeared down the rabbit hole, Peter, down through a red brick, small building. He and what skeleton staff are with him, down into an underground bunker where Ari Fleischer tells me the president is going to chair a National Security Council meeting by teleconference. You know, in 27 years of covering presidents and crises, we have never played the kind of hunted game that was played today.
We've been told that the president may be back as early as this evening. The AP was also reporting he's considering some sort of address to the nation this evening.
Is the president coming back from a trip that has taken him first to Florida today to talk about education? There's nothing that this president, this new and young president, could ever have imagined was going to occur on his watch, which would test his leadership qualities. So,
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and...
Just another reminder of what it was like on that day. It's true that many of us were frustrated as to where the president was and wondered why he was. Some people thought after we were criticizing the president, not the case. We just were very determined that we needed to see him and we needed his leadership at the time. And when you look back at it now, there are just so many things we know now that were not clear then. We've asked our White House correspondent, Terry Moran, to pick up the backstory.
It is the moment that forever changed the presidency of George W. Bush.
I tried to find words that would be efficient, let the president know the gravity of the situation, that it could not have been a coincidence. I said, a second plane hit the second tower. America is under attack. And then I backed away from the president.
At that instant, the president was alone, as only a president can be alone. Over the course of the rest of September 11th, 2001, as the hours passed and the scale of the attacks emerged, Mr. Bush would embark on an unprecedented presidential odyssey, logging more than 2,300 miles aboard Air Force One.
I want to reassure the American people.
Speaking to a stricken and frightened nation 3 times, and assuming the awesome powers and responsibilities of a commander-in-chief during wartime. Up until September 11th, George W. Bush was still a relatively untested president, having been in office for only 234 days.
Just warming up. Come on, stretch. Come on.
That day began in Sarasota, Florida, with a pre-dawn 3-mile run. Then on to his first stop that morning, the Emma T. Booker Elementary School, a routine event designed to promote his education proposals. Just before his arrival, aides told Mr. Bush of the first plane crashing into the World Trade Center. The president proceeded with his planned event, sitting in on a second-grade reading class.
Everybody tell me what this part of the word says. Run.
And then at 9:05 a.m., he got the news.
Your face told it all. Something terribly grave, something terribly serious, something beyond imagining.
I made up my mind right then and there that if somebody was attacking us, we would respond with the full might of America.
I think he understood the gravity of the situation, and he was very well composed.
Mr. Bush hurried to an adjacent classroom where his staff had gathered. Carl Rove, his top political advisor, was with him.
As he walked in the room, they were playing the footage of the second plane flying into the World Trade Center, and he looked at the television set and said, we're at war, get me the director of the FBI and get me the vice president.
After a quick briefing from Washington, Mr. Bush wrote a short statement, then stepped in front of cameras to address the nation.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
He struck an oddly informal note describing the terrorists for the first time, pledging
to conduct a full-scale investigation, to hunt down and to find those folks who committed this act.
Time was now critical. ABC's Ann Compton was with the president that day.
We raced aboard the aircraft, not knowing that by the time we were on board that plane, everything had changed. It was not just New York, the financial district attacked. It was Washington attacked.
The first question that needed answering, where would the president go? Mr. Bush wanted to come home. His advisors in the White House said that was out of the question.
At that moment, you have to worry about the continuity of the United States government. It's very clear that Washington was under attack. It was very clear that they were going for symbols of power and for the seats of power.
The president acquiesced. As the nation reeled, he flew on. There was no time for second guessing. In New York City, the Twin Towers were falling. The president made a momentous decision. Any hijacked commercial jet still in the air would be shot down.
Very, very tough decision. And the president understood the magnitude of that decision.
Just before noon, Air Force One landed at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where the plane refueled. The president made a second statement.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
By 1:37, Air Force One was airborne again. The plane headed north to Nebraska and the Strategic Air Command at Offutt Air Force Base. The president was led down to a Cold War bunker where he convened a video conference call with his national security team back in Washington.
And then he said, and I'll be back tonight. I'm coming back tonight. And he said it in a way that it was pretty clear that there was no arguing with him this time.
6:30 that evening, Air Force One returned to Washington. The president choppered to the White House just across the river from the smoldering Pentagon.
It was the president's first eye-to-eye connection with the attack on our country. And he said aloud to nobody in particular, the mightiest building in the world is on fire. That's the 21st century war you just witnessed.
Minutes later, the commander-in-chief was finally home. That night, for the third time, he addressed the nation, this time from the Oval Office.
Today, our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature.
And he uttered the words that became the cornerstone of his administration's policy.
We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
He was now a president of a nation at war.
Thank you very much, Terry Moran, who is with us at the White House today. So here we are a year later, Terry, and our reporting of the last couple of days, yours very much so, reflects an anxious government and a nervous Capitol. For one thing, the vice president is in an undisclosed location again. Would you just characterize the mood for us there today?
Well, it's tense but business-like. Tense is now part of the regular order of business. On days when there is some kind of spike in concern, you'll see a few more officers around. When the president went to church this morning across Lafayette Park, there were the SWAT team dressed men walking around and women, I should say, walking around the White House lawn. The White House has long been very secure, and it's secure enough so that the president can still lead at least some semblance of a human life. He will walk his dogs on occasion in the Rose Garden. I've even bumped into him out there almost, which didn't make the Secret Service very happy. What's really different is when he travels, Peter. They have locked down presidential events to an extraordinary degree, as anyone who's tried to get to one over the last few months knows. And he doesn't overnight as much around the country, in hotels around the country, as he did. So they've extended that circle of protection.
That's interesting. And today, of course, there are live missiles in place around various locations in Washington, or covering various locations in Washington. They told us yesterday that every building of significance in the city was protected today.
That's right. That is part of what's being called an exercise, Clear Skies 2 it's called, but the decision to arm those batteries with live missiles at hand, my understanding is not actually loaded and ready to go, was made by the White House yesterday afternoon as that escalation in the threat level came about from yellow to orange.
Thanks very much, Terry. Yes, I should have reminded people earlier of that, just in case you didn't, just yesterday, that with the White House's agreement, the Attorney General raised the threat level, the terrorist threat level, from yellow to orange. It's the second highest level of threat alert. Largely, the Attorney General said to us yesterday, because of concerns they had overseas, particularly in Asia, but it applies everywhere. Back a year again, on Capitol Hill a year ago, there was incredible confusion. There were so many rumors. There was no real evacuation plan, as best any of us could tell on the day. And despite fears that the Capitol itself might be a target, it would take some time before the entire congressional leadership was moved to a secure underground bunker. Before we talk to her, here is our Capitol Hill correspondent Linda Douglas's report on the day.
It was a glorious Tuesday morning on Capitol Hill.
It was a brilliant, clear day, bright blue sky.
Crisp air, white puffy clouds in the sky. It was just a beautiful morning.
House will be in order.
More than 400 members of Congress were preparing to meet in the Capitol. Congressional leaders were already huddled in meetings. Suddenly, their aides broke in.
And there was a knock at the door about halfway through that meeting and said, Mr. Speaker, there's something happened at the World Trade Tower.
House Speaker Dennis Hastert rushed to his office in time to see the second plane hit on TV. Someone told him the vice president was trying to reach him on his secure phone. The phone wouldn't work.
You had to turn a key and put a code in, and we couldn't make the combination with the vice president.
As he waited to hear from Dick Cheney, Hastert looked out the window toward the Pentagon. Something was wrong.
There was a huge curl of smoke, blue-black smoke that was coming across the Capitol Mall. And I said to my staff, it's not supposed to be there. What happened?
It began to sink in. The Capitol could be next.
Some Capitol policemen broke into the room and said, we're under attack. I've got to take you out right away.
And he said, we think a plane is on its way to the Capitol. And then it was mass rush exodus.
People were just as fearful as I've seen. I saw looks in senators' faces, looks in staff faces that I've never seen before.
The chairman of the Intelligence Committee was quickly escorted from a top-secret briefing where he had just been told about new threats from the terrorist group, Al-Qaeda.
We need to go north now! Go!
Workers, tourists, senators scattered as word spread that a plane was 20 minutes away.
A plane is heading for the Capitol.
People crowded around the Senate chaplain.
God bless America. Amen.
Dignitaries were rushed away, including the First Lady, who had been there to testify about education.
I was put in one of our secure automobiles, and the next thing I knew, I was hurtling through the back streets of Washington.
While the Speaker was whisked to an Air Force base, the other leaders were herded into a room 2 blocks from the Capitol.
We were in a vulnerable position. We were all in one place, and I started asking, who's in charge here?
Did you feel at that moment as though the legislative branch of government was operative?
We weren't operative. We were like everybody else. We were in complete chaos.
Outside, misinformation was rampant.
We know there was a car bomb at the State Department, at the main State Department building.
Capitol Police ordered the leaders to hurry to the west front of the Capitol, where military helicopters would take them to a secret location.
I'll never forget, as long as I live, walking up on that west front lawn of the Capitol and to see the entire roof of the Capitol lined with black-clothed SWAT teams with submachine guns.
When they landed, they found themselves at an underground bunker somewhere in Virginia.
There was a granite-like stone on the sides. I mean, literally there it was, like a cave.
It is a facility that was in progress of being constructed to be survivable in a nuclear or other kind of attack.
Inside, in a place like this, they paced. Finally, the vice president called.
Everybody was asking rapid-fire questions, just interrupting, and the level of anxiety was very clear.
Slowly, they realized Vice President Cheney was in command of the government. Congress would be forced to take orders.
Some of the leaders were saying, we're a separate branch of the government. We can make our own decisions. We don't have to wait for his word to go back.
I pressed him to say, Mr. Vice President, we'd like to get back to the Capitol as soon as we can. And he said, in effect, not right now.
Mr. Cheney told them they must stay in the bunker in case there was an attack on the Capitol. The rest of Congress was milling around on sidewalks near the Capitol, where confusion reigned. They argued publicly about whether to go back into session.
This is no time to leave the Capitol vacant as a symbol that we don't have the courage to go back into session.
A Republican senator insisted the White House did not need Congress to help make decisions.
And we should express confidence in the president and his branch to do the right thing. I think we should go back in session.
It was obvious that rump leaders were asserting themselves, saying, I'm senior or I'm in the leadership, I will now take over.
Late that day, the vice president let the frustrated leaders go back. On the steps of the Capitol, they were met by more than 200 members.
Congress will convene tomorrow.
Someone began to sing.
America, my home, sweet home.
That night, there was an extraordinary feeling of kinship between Democrats and Republicans, but it could not mask the sense of horror at what might have been.
How vulnerable that day was our system of government?
I think extremely vulnerable, from the top to the bottom.
Linda Douglas, on the day, that moment when they all sang God Bless America outside the Capitol was, I think, as moving a moment as there was in the entire day. But Linda Douglas is now with us, and we had no idea how much tension there was behind the scenes at the time. Is there even more compared to what they gave us on camera?
There was a lot of tension and there was a lot of argument, Peter, because as you could tell, you're dealing with leaders. They all wanted to make decisions. They were cut off from their followers, so the followers were making ad hoc decisions in the street. A lot of that's changed now. There are new plans for a continuity of government program, a way to evacuate and move the leaders and recreate communication.
Hearing Trent Lott there, the Republican leaders say that the government is vulnerable from top to bottom. How much change has there been on Capitol Hill in the last year?
Well, Peter, this place will always be vulnerable. There are 20,000 people working here at the Capitol. 535 elected representatives meet under one roof. But it's changed a lot, and in a very sad way, I think. All of us have brought our children here to see the Capitol, all of us in America over the years. You can't get in now without an appointment. You can't take yourself on a tour. There are concrete blocks all around. Streets are closed. Police are everywhere. They're building a huge underground visitor center where everyone will have to be screened to go into the Capitol. That was being planned before, but it was rushed now. The big trees are gone. You can't sit there and feed the squirrels anymore. It's a different place.
Thank you very much, Linda Douglas on Capitol Hill. We'll hear from her again throughout the day, but graphic reminders you can get that the place is just not the same and not going to be the same. Nobody's talking about taking down the barriers anywhere in the country. However, as you saw, Senator Biden and Senator Warner, they're having a sharp discussion about what should proceed. We reminded that as early as that morning, the questions actually began. How could this have happened? How was it possible for 4 planes to be hijacked on one day? There were comparisons to the surprise attack on Pearl